Think about the last time you laughed. Really laughed. Maybe it was something small. A funny face. A person slipping on something and catching themselves just in time. A moment so perfectly clumsy that you could not help it. Laughter like that feels free, easy, like a gift. Now think about this. What if the person making you laugh was carrying something very heavy inside? What if the man with the funniest walk in the world had learned that walk on the streets where he nearly starved? What if the warmest smile in cinema belonged to a boy who grew up with almost nothing? No home, no money, no one to hold his hand. My friends, this is the story of Charlie Chaplin, a man the whole world laughed with, a man very few people truly knew. And perhaps one of the greatest questions his life leaves us with is this: can a person turn their pain into something beautiful? Can suffering become a gift? Let us find out. Together, to understand Charlie Chaplin, we must go to a place very far from Hollywood. We must go to London. In the 1880s, not the London of grand parks and beautiful bridges, not the London that appears on postcards. We must go to the other London. The London of narrow, dirty streets, of families sharing one cold room, of children who worked before they could read. This is where Charles Spencer Chaplin was born, on April 16, 1889. His parents were both performers. They sang and danced on the small stages of music halls, cheap theaters where working people paid a few coins to forget their hard lives for an hour. It sounds like a romantic beginning, a family of artists. But the romance did not last. His father, Charles Sr., was a talented singer. He was also an alcoholic. He drank more and more as the years passed. He drifted away from the family. And then, for all purposes, he was gone. Charlie was left with his mother, Hannah. Hannah Chaplin was a gentlewoman. She loved her children deeply. She tried everything she could to keep them fed and safe. She took in sewing. She performed when she could find work. She moved from one small room to another, always looking for something cheaper, something manageable. But London, in those years, was not kind to a woman alone with 2 children and no money. There were weeks when there was very little food. Charlie remembered, years later, the feeling of going to bed hungry, the cold that came through thin walls in winter, the sound of his mother crying quietly when she thought he was asleep, the smell of that small room, damp walls, cheap tallow candles, old wood, stayed with him his entire life. Then came the moment that broke everything. Hannah's voice began to fail. A singer without a voice has nothing to sell. She lost her ability to perform. And without work, without money, without anyone to help, the pressure became too much. Hannah began to lose her mind. She was taken to a psychiatric hospital when Charlie was still a young boy. This was not a kind place. In those days, mental illness was not understood. It was feared. People were locked away and forgotten. Charlie and his older brother Sidney were left alone. They were sent to a workhouse, a grim institution where the very poor were given food and shelter in exchange for hard labor. The workhouse was cold and strict. Children were separated from adults. The days were long and gray. Charlie was around 7 years old. Picture that for a moment. A small boy, sleeping in a large room full of strangers, not knowing where his mother was or when she was coming back. He never fully stopped being that boy. But even there, something was alive inside him. He watched people. He noticed the way a man walked when he was tired, the way a woman held her head when she was proud but had nothing left, the way children laughed even in the worst places. Quickly, unexpectedly, like small lights in the dark, he was learning. Without knowing he was learning. He was collecting the raw material of his entire life's work. My friends, if the story is touching your heart, please subscribe to Calm English Journeys. These stories are made with care for you. Your support means we can keep making them together. There is a story Charlie Chaplin told about his very first time on stage. He was 5 years old. His mother was performing at a small music hall when her voice suddenly gave out completely. The audience began to laugh, not kindly. They threw coins at the stage, small, hard coins hitting the wooden floor. The theater manager, not knowing what else to do, pushed little Charlie out onto the stage. Charlie stood there, alone, under the lights, facing a room full of strangers. And then he did something remarkable. He performed. He sang a song. He danced a little. He made the audience laugh, this time kindly, warmly. They threw more coins, but now as a gift, not a punishment. Charlie stopped to pick them up. announcing to the audience that he would collect the money before finishing the song. The audience roared with laughter. He was 5 years old, and he already understood something deep about the relationship between a performer and a crowd. He understood that laughter was a kind of connection, a bridge between one human heart and another. After that night, the stage was his home, perhaps his only real home. He performed wherever he could find work: small theaters, street corners, touring companies that traveled across England in cold trains, sleeping in cheap rooms, eating whatever was available. By the time he was a teenager, he was already a professional performer. Disciplined, observant, always watching, always learning. Then, in 1910, everything changed again. A famous comedy company called Fred Karno's troupe traveled to America. Charlie went with them. He was 21 years old, carrying almost nothing, crossing the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. America was loud and fast and full of possibility, and Hollywood was just beginning. A new industry was being born: the moving picture. Silent films, short, flickering black and white stories that played in small theaters across the country. People loved them. They were cheap. They were magical. They were something the world had never seen before. A film producer named Max Sennett saw Charlie perform and offered him a job making films. Charlie said yes. In 1914, Charlie Chaplin appeared on screen for the first time. He tried on different costumes, looking for a character. He picked up a pair of oversized shoes, a small tight jacket, a round bowler hat, a thin bamboo cane. He added a small square mustache. He took a few steps. That walk, those small, quick, waddling steps, the cane swinging, the hat tilting, appeared fully formed, almost by magic. The little tramp was born, a poor man, a wanderer, a man with no money, no home, no status, but enormous dignity. The tramp was always kind, always hopeful, always finding a way to smile at a world that kept knocking him down. He was everything Charlie had been as a boy, everything he understood from the inside. Within 2 years, Charlie Chaplin was the most famous person on earth, not the most famous actor, not the most famous entertainer, the most famous person on earth, in an age before radio, before television, before the internet. His face was recognized in every country, in every language, by people who had never heard a word of English, because he never needed words. His body told the story. His eyes told the story. A woman in a small village in India and a factory worker in Chicago and a child in Tokyo could all sit in a dark theater and watch the same flickering image and feel the same thing at the same moment: laughter, tenderness, the sudden surprising ache of something almost like sadness, all from a man who had learned to feel those things very, very deeply. But my friends, let us step behind the camera for a moment, because the man who made the world laugh was not laughing when the lights went off. Fame had come to Charlie Chaplin faster than almost anyone in history. By the time he was 30, he was not just a performer. He was a business, a brand, a one-man industry. He started his own film studio. He wrote, directed, produced, and starred in his own films. He controlled everything. The work was everything to him. He would film the same scene 50, 60, 70 times until it was exactly right. He rehearsed every movement, every glance, every small stumble. What looked accidental on screen was practiced for hours in an empty studio, the wooden floor cold and hard under his feet. He was a perfectionist, and perfectionists are not easy to live with. His personal life told that story clearly. He married 4 times. His first 2 marriages ended quickly and painfully. He was difficult. He was obsessive about his work. He was often distant, lost inside his own mind, thinking about the next film, the next scene, the next idea. The women in his life found themselves married, not to a man, but to an obsession. And there was something else, something darker. Charlie Chaplin was never fully comfortable with who he was. He had come from the very bottom of society, from the workhouse, from hungry nights and cold rooms, and now he lived in a mansion in Hollywood, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world. But wealth did not erase memory. Success did not fill the hole that a missing father and a lost mother had left inside him. He searched. He searched for love in the wrong places, for certainty in a life that had never offered any, for a home in a world that still sometimes felt foreign. And then the world turned against him. The 1940s brought a new kind of trouble. America was in the grip of deep political fear. The Cold War was beginning. Politicians were hunting for communists, for people with dangerous ideas, for anyone who seemed to question the American way of life. Charlie Chaplin had always used his films to say something. His 1936 film, Modern Times, showed workers being crushed by machines in factories. His 1940 film, The Great Dictator, directly mocked Adolf Hitler. A brave and remarkable thing to do at a time when America had not yet entered the war. These were not the films of a man who stayed quiet. And powerful people do not like artists who do not stay quiet. The FBI had been watching Charlie Chaplin for years. They built a file on him. They called him a communist sympathizer. They questioned his loyalty. They investigated his private life, looking for anything they could use against him. In 1952, Charlie Chaplin left America to travel to London for the premiere of a new film. While he was at sea, the American government canceled his visa. He was not allowed to return. After 40 years in America, after building an entire industry, after giving the world some of its most beloved films, he was told in the middle of the ocean that he was no longer welcome. He stood on the deck of the ship, the cold Atlantic wind around him, and made a decision. He would not fight it. He settled in Switzerland with his fourth wife, Una, and their children. He built a quiet life, a garden, long walks, family dinners, simple things he had never had as a boy. But the rejection stayed with him. It always does for people who have been rejected since the very beginning. Years passed. The world kept moving. New films came. New stars rose. Television replaced cinema as the place where people gathered to laugh and forget their troubles. The flickering black and white images of the silent era began to feel very far away. And yet, something strange happened. People kept coming back to Charlie Chaplin. A new generation discovered The Little Tramp. Young people who had never seen a silent film sat down to watch and found themselves laughing, really laughing, at a man who had made those films 30, 40, 50 years earlier. Something in those films refused to age, refused to become old or distant or irrelevant, because The Tramp was not really about the 1920s. He was not really about silent film or black and white photography or any particular moment in time. He was about something permanent. He was about the person who has nothing and keeps going anyway, the person who is knocked down and stands up, straightens their hat, and walks forward with quiet dignity. The person who finds a small, unexpected moment of beauty in a hard and indifferent world. That person exists in every century, in every country, in every language. In 1972, something remarkable happened. Charlie Chaplin was invited back to America. The country that had expelled him 20 years earlier now wanted to honor him. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Hollywood's most important institution, invited him to receive an honorary Oscar, the highest recognition the film world could offer. He was 82 years old. He walked slowly onto the stage, a small white-haired man in a suit, blinking in the bright lights. The audience rose to their feet. They clapped for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of applause, unbroken, the longest standing ovation in the history of the Academy Awards. Charlie Chaplin stood there, his eyes wet, his hands clasped together, nodding gently. He tried to speak several times. He could not find the words. The man who had spent his entire career communicating without words had, in this moment, no words left. He returned to Switzerland. He continued his quiet life, his garden, his children, Una beside him. He died on Christmas morning, 1977. He was 88 years old. And then, something almost unbelievable happened. His body was stolen from its grave. 2 men dug up his coffin and held it for ransom, demanding money from his family. They were eventually caught. Charlie Chaplin was reburied, this time under a thick concrete slab, to make sure he would not be disturbed again. Even in death, his story could not be ordinary. Today, his films are preserved in museums and archives around the world. Film schools study his technique. Directors from every country name him as an influence. His image, The Tramp, with the hat and the cane and the walk, is one of the most recognized images in the history of human culture. more recognized than most kings, more recognized than most presidents. A boy from the cold streets of London who grew up with nothing, who taught himself to perform in drafty music halls and on rain-wet street corners. That boy became a permanent part of what it means to be human, not because he was perfect, not because his life was easy or clean or without shadow, but because he took what was broken inside him and turned it into something the whole world could feel. There is a moment in a film called City Lights. It was made in 1931. It is silent, of course, black and white, flickering and old. Near the end of the film, the tramp sees a young blind woman for the first time. She cannot see him. She does not know who he is. She assumes, from small clues, that he must be a wealthy and important man. He lets her believe it. He is not wealthy. He is not important. He is the tramp, poor, homeless, nobody. But he does everything he can to help her. He finds money for an operation that restores her sight. He sacrifices everything he has, and then later, the woman can see. She is standing in her flower shop, bright and happy and full of life. She sees a shabby little man outside the window. A man in worn clothes with an old hat and a thin cane. She almost laughs at him. Then she recognizes his hands. She realizes who he is, what he gave her, what he was. She takes his hand gently. He stands very still. His eyes, those extraordinary eyes, look at her with something that is not quite hope, and not quite fear, and not quite sadness. Something that has no name. Something that every person who has ever loved quietly, without asking for anything back, immediately understands. The film ends there. No words, no explanation, just that face. People have been crying at that moment for almost 100 years. Because Charlie Chaplin knew something that very few artists ever truly know. He knew that the deepest human feelings do not need language. They do not need explanation. They only need honesty. And the only way to be truly honest on screen, or on stage, or on the page, is to have lived something real. He had lived real things, more real than most people could imagine. The cold room, the hungry nights, the mother taken away, the boy alone. The rejection, the long crossing of an ocean toward an uncertain future. He carried all of it, every single day, behind every smile, behind every stumble, behind every gentle, impossible moment of grace that the tramp offered to the world. Some people spend their whole lives trying to escape their past. Charlie Chaplin spent his whole life turning his past into something luminous, not by forgetting it, not by pretending it did not happen, but by looking at it clearly, feeling it completely, and then, and this is the part that takes the most courage, offering it to others. Here, this is what pain feels like. But look, even here there is something worth smiling at. Even here, somewhere tonight, in a small apartment in a city you have never heard of, someone is watching City Lights for the first time. They do not know much about Charlie Chaplin. They do not know about the workhouse or the mother or the FBI file or the ship on the Atlantic. They just see a little man in a worn hat standing in the cold light outside a flower shop window, and something inside them opens, quietly, without warning, like a door they did not know was there. My friends, we have come to the end of a beautiful and tender story today. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you something simple. Is there a moment in your life when you turned something painful into something good? A time when difficulty gave you a gift you did not expect? Leave your answer in the comments below. Just a few words. I read every single one, and I would truly love to hear your story. And that is our story for today, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped you learn something new. Keep listening, keep growing, and I will see you again very soon in our next story. Take care, my friends. Goodbye.